Hey, so second part of book one, and probably arguably the most important part of book one, as the beginning of book one really sets the stage, and now the second part is where it gets to kind of the meat of the content. And then book two and book three is where the action kind of ensues a little bit further. But after the instance of burning the books where the woman was home and committed suicide, Montag is quite disturbed and he thinks, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? I'm thoroughly confused. And so we're going to see kind of his process of trying to understand this. So he's talking he's talking to his fire chief, Beatty, who again is his foil, the one who does everything right, and Montag does everything wrong, at least socially speaking. And so Beatty comes to visit him at his house because he calls in sick and he's like, I just can't do this job anymore. And he doesn't want to quite come out and say it because if he does, he knows that the government might come after him. And so Beatty kind of suspects that this is what's happening. And so he's beginning to talk to him about books. And this is kind of where I want to sort of break it down and see the similarity between his culture and our culture and what the warning was supposed to be that our author was issuing to the readers. So it says, Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he'd put in the air. Picture it. 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. But then in the 20th century, so for those of you who aren't really up to speed, that was like 1800s versus 1900s. And in the 20th century, speed up your camera. Books are cut shorter. Condensations, digests, tabloids, everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Snap ending? Mildred nodded. Classics are cut fit 15-minute radio shows, but then they're cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. So, for instance, he says what once was a book then became a 15-minute radio program, and then it became sort of like a 2-paragraph summary, aka Spark Notes, that sort of thing. And then he goes on and he says that for most people, their basic knowledge of Hamlet is a 1-page digest in a book that claims, well, now at least you can read all the classics and keep up with your neighbors. Do you see? Out of the nursery into the college and back to the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. What is that saying? You start out ignorant, you go to college, and then you go back ignorant again. And what he's basically saying is that this pattern of regression or anti-intellectualism is what people want because it's easy. Mildred arose and she began to move around the room, picking things up and putting them down. And Beatty ignored her and continued. The wife is in the room. She can't even sit long enough to have a conversation. She has to get up and move and do something. Speed up the film, Montag. Quick, click, pick. Look, I, now, flick, here, there, swift, pace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, bang, smack. Wallop, bing, bong, boom. Why those short words? Because people want to be instantly having their attention jolted. They're entertained, kind of that dopamine that is released in your brain every time something is abrupt and sudden and captures your attention. They don't have the attention span to sit and wait and think and process in long, complex sentences with long, complex dialogue in long, complex books. Digest, 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 digest. What about politics? 1 column, 2 sentences, a headline. And then in midair, it vanishes. You want to whirl man's mind around so fast under the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters, that the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary, time-wasting thought. But wait a minute, doesn't matter. What about doesn't matter? So again, they're doing everything they can to strip humans of all insight, all thought, and all inquiry. Mildred smoothed down the bedclothes, and Montag felt his heart jump because she's going to find a book that he has hidden under his pillow. He begins to say school is shortened. Discipline is relaxed. Philosophy, history, language is dropped. English and spelling gradually neglected. Finally, they're almost completely ignored. Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all in work. Why learn something except for pressing buttons and pulling switches and fixing nuts and bolts? Let me fix your pillow, says Mildred. No, whispered Montag. And so they she continues to be a demonstration of what he's talking about, just completely simple-minded and unthinking. And so he continues and he says, empty the theaters, except for clowns, and furnish the rooms with glass walls and pretty colors running up and down the walls like confetti or blood or sherry. You like baseball, don't you, Montag? Yeah, baseball's a fine game. Well, now Beatty was almost invisible in a voice somewhere behind a screen of smoke. Sit down, Montag shouted to his wife, because she's still, like, not focusing. Her hands were empty and she's jumping. Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. Do you like bowling? Don't you, Montag? Bowling, yes. And golf? Golf is a fine game. Basketball, billiards, pool, football. Yes, they're fine games, all of them. More sports for everyone. Group spirit, fun, and you don't have to think. Organize and super organize, super sports. More cartoons and books, more pictures. The mind drinks less and less. So this fanaticism over sports, why? Because it's easy, because it's consumable, because it doesn't require mental arithmetic exercise and discipline. It's immediate, it's fast, it's sudden, it's entertaining. The mind drinks less and less. Highways full of crowds are going somewhere, but nowhere. The gasoline refugee, towns turn into motels and people into nomadic surges. They go from place to place, following moontides, living tonight in the room where you slept this noon and I the night before. So that's kind of the obsession with travel. Again, something relevant. Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door, and the parlor aunts began to laugh, and the parlor uncles. So in other words, she turned on the TV for her family. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? He says. The bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of dog lovers or cat lovers or doctors or lawyers or merchants or chiefs or Mormons or Baptists, Unitarians, second-generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial, they're not meant to represent any actual people anywhere. The bigger your market, the less you handle controversy. Remember that all the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean, authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca, and books so snobbish critics had to say where the dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. And the three-dimensional magazines, of course, there you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You are allowed to read comics, the good old confessions or trade journals. So what he was saying is that there was so many people advocating for, like, this is most important, dogs or cats or being a minority or my culture versus your culture, and it was us versus them on almost every matter. And so he said, if you do away with intellectual thoughts that take people and make them different from one another, then you do away with unhappiness, because what makes people unhappy at the root? It's comparison. You look at somebody who's thinner, you look at somebody who is more X, Y, or Z, someone more athletic, somebody who has a relationship and you don't. And in that comparison, you become less than, it makes you unhappy, and so you need something more. And he says if you do away with all thinking, then people won't be aware of that. They won't be aware of the comparison, and they will simply think about what is right in front of them, and they'll stay busy and they'll stay distracted. And in that is a sense of sort of like a sense of happiness, whether it is actual genuine happiness or not. And so he says, so what about the firemen? He leaned forward. What more easily explained and natural? Was school turning out more runners and jumpers and racers and tinkerers and grabbers and snatchers and flyers and swimmers instead of examiners, critics, knowers, and imaginative creators? The word intellectual became the swear word that it deserved to be. You always dread the unfamiliar. You remember the boy in your school who was exceptionally bright. He did most of the reciting and answering while everyone else sat hating him. Not everyone was born free and intellectual, as the Constitution says, but everyone, we can make them equal, each man the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower to judge themselves against. So, a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take the shot from the weapon. Breach man's mind. Who knows who might be the target for the well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. So when houses were finally fireproof completely, there was no need for a fireman. They were given a new job as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior. Official censors, judges, and executors. That's you, Montag. And that's me. So, why is this book significant? What is the message that it's trying to send? That conformity is the antidote to unhappiness, because people do not want to be what? What would you fit in there based on what this is talking about? People don't want to be less than. People don't want to be unhappy because they don't measure up. They don't want to see or sense or experience that there's something that they aren't. And so to eliminate that sense of dissatisfaction, you make every man the image of every other. And then they're happy because they all look exactly the same. What do you think? Is that your image of happiness? Would that solve a problem? Does that seem so far afield, or is that actually the way that humans work? So, these firemen are the custodians of their peace of mind. You must understand that our civilization is so vast we can't have our minorities upset and stirred. Ask yourself, what do we want in this country above all? People want to be happy. Isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say. Well, aren't they? Don't we keep them moving? Don't we give them fun? That's all we live for, isn't it? For pleasure? For titillation? And you must admit our culture provides plenty of these. So, burn it. Someone doesn't like it, burn it. Someone doesn't like it, burn it. Burn the book. Serenity, peace, take your fight outside, better yet, into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy, eliminate them too. 5 minutes after a person is dead, he's on his way to the big flu, the incinerator serviced by the helicopters all over the country. 10 minutes after a man's death, he is a speck of black dust. Let's not quibble over memories, forget them, burn them all. Fire is bright, and fire is clean. And then he says, that's why the home environment can undo a lot of school training. That's why we've lowered the kindergarten age until we're almost snatching them from the cradle. Why are they snatching them from the cradle? Because she was a time bomb. People are feeding through their subconscious. And what do? How do people wind up being unhappy? Well, they're unhappy politically, they're unhappy socially, they're unhappy because they know that they're unhappy. So give the people contests to win by simply remembering words to popular songs or the names of the states and capitals. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chock them so darn full of facts that they feel stuffed with brilliant information. And then they'll feel that they're thinking, get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy. Because facts of that sort don't change. Give them any slippery stuff like philosophy or sociology, that waylays melancholy. Any man who can take a TV wall apart and put it together again is happier than any man who tries the slide rule, the measure, and to equate the universe. It won't be measured. It won't be equated. He'll be lonely. I've tried it. Bring your clubs and parties and acrobats and magicians and daredevils and jet cars and motorcycle helicopters and sex and heroin and more of everything having to do with automatic reflex. And then he says, I don't care. It's just solid entertainment. We are the happiness boys, you and I and the others. We stand against the tide of those who want to make everyone unhappy with theory and thought. We have our fingers in the dike. Hold steady. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world. We depend on you.